Uh, Thanks a lot for visiting Talk of the Track today. I'm Bill Rush, and we have a real privilege today to meet with Jessica Paquette. And she is the new announcer, relatively new announcer at the Parx racetrack. And how long have you been there?
I have been there since November of 2022. So we're kind of going on about a year, almost a year and a half now.
Oh, that's great. And am I right? You're the only female announcer actually in the country.
In all of North America. Yes,
And
that's true.
that's quite an honor.
It's been a
Uh,
lot of fun and it's a great chance to, hopefully show some younger girls that they can do this if they'd like to.
yeah. Yeah, I actually have a question about that a little later on. But Parks is quite a racetrack. It's the largest track in the region, and it's really state of the art. And so, how do you like it there?
It's great. It's my kind of racetrack. I grew up at Suffolk Downs, worked there for almost 20 years. So I have a real soft spot for a racetrack kind of plopped into a pretty urban environment. And here at Parks, there are quite a few of my old friends from New England racing. So it's always nice having some familiar faces to get to call.
Oh, really? Well, how did you actually get into racing?
So I grew up as a horse crazy kid and we didn't have a lot of money. And I fell in love with the racetrack pretty early on. I was about 13 or 14. I fell in love with a horse named Blazing Sword, who was on the Kentucky Derby Trail. And these were the early days of AOL message boards, which does date me just a little bit. But a woman named Trudy McCaffrey, who owned Freehouse, among some other really nice racehorses, she started an organization back in like 1999, 2000 to bring kids to the racetrack and show us all the positive sides of racing. So she brought myself and a bunch of other kids to the Breeders' Cup, the Triple Crown, various other places, and we all fell totally in love with racing. And many of us have made it our careers.
Wow, it's actually an honor to go to those races.
It sure was.
How did she help? What did she do?
I mean, she brought us to the races along with our parents, so we weren't like unsupervised minors running around the racetrack.
Yeah.
But she, along with John DeSantis, Kate and Bradar, they would bring us on the backside and introduce us to the horses and the people. And I just remember being about 14, walking through Todd Pletcher's barn. And this is kind of a little bit before Todd was the Todd we all know. He was really kind of just rising to stardom at that point. But going down his shed row and seeing More Than Ready and Graham Hall and Trippy, I was just starstruck by the quality of the horses, the way they were cared for, and for me there was nothing else I wanted after that.
Well, that's very interesting. Um, what are some of the other jobs you had prior to going to Parks?
Well, I've done a little bit of everything. I was at Suffolk Downs for almost 20 years as the handicapper and TV personality, as well as the vice president of marketing. I've worked for the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation as their director of communications. I also do some PR and crisis comms and media relations for some industry clients through Conover Tuttle Pace, which is a Boston-based ad agency where I do still work. So I like to stay pretty busy.
Wow, you really do. You have quite an experience. Parks has some pretty big races, don't they?
We sure do. We have a pair of grade ones, the Cotillion and the Pennsylvania Derby. Both are worth $1 million. So this past September, it was a huge honor to become the first woman ever in history to call a grade one race.
Wow. Yes, that's quite a responsibility. What is a typical race day composed of? How's it go? Do you get there a half hour before the race, or do you go there several hours before the race?
I get there pretty early, so I get up pretty early. I like to go for a run. I'm often training for a marathon, so I get up, go for a run, get ready for the races, and then I get here. I do often film some segments with my TV crew. We try to do some educational content as well as showcasing the horsemen and women here. So often I'll go to the backside, film something, and then kind of get up to the booth and get ready for the races. I color my notes usually a couple of days beforehand. I like to color the jockey silks for my own visual reference. So I always do that ahead of time. But then, as the racing morning goes on, I get scratches and changes and put together. I do put together some handicapping selections throughout the day. So I put together like a pick five ticket for the broadcast and things like that.
Well, how in the world did you get involved in handicapping? What age did that happen?
I was a teenager, so the second I could drive, I used to go to Rockingham Park in New Hampshire because it was closer to my house than Suffolk Downs was back then, back when there were multiple racetracks in New England in the old days. And I was probably 16, 17, and I would go to Rockingham. And there was a group of older gentlemen who I think they didn't want me to get harassed by less savory characters at a racetrack. So they invited me to sit with them and I'd sit with them every day and I'd kind of pick up little handicapping tips and tricks from them. And that's how I learned to handicap, was from those guys. And they also kept me fairly safe at the racetrack when I was probably too young to be bopping around there by myself.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Well, not to change the subject, but I heard you mention that you're a runner. So am I actually.
Oh, good for you.
And my better days are behind, but I still run. And that's great. So you're actually training for a marathon, are you?
Yeah, so I broke my back in October of 2020, right before I was supposed to run my first marathon, which was really disappointing. But I was very fortunate that I came back very well from that. I ran the Chicago Marathon in 2021. Last year, I did the Boston Marathon and the New York Marathon, and I'm going to do Vermont in this spring. And then I got into the Berlin Marathon in the fall, where I'm chasing the six world stars. So after Berlin,
Wow.
I will just have Tokyo and London left.
Wow, that is so interesting. Keep that up. That'll keep you young.
I love it. It's a huge part of who I am. And I have all my best ideas while I'm on a long run.
That's good. You know, I'm kind of that way too. It's amazing what I can come up with while I'm running.
Yeah, no, it kind of, for me, it centers my thoughts a little bit. And it's kind of the only time where I'm pretty disconnected from my phone and from social media and from all of that stuff that's a part of all of this, but it is a little bit of a nuisance. So it's a really nice time to disconnect for me.
Right. So do you get a chance to meet trainers? You probably do.
I do, yeah. So I do a lot of interviews and features and things on the horsemen and women here. So I do know that I know them quite well at this point.
Well, that's great. Um, something always kind of strikes me is how in the world do you all remember all those horses' names? The day
It's
comes
hard.
and there's 9, 10, 11, 12 races, and you come up with the names. It's not like you remember the numbers, you remember the names.
It is, and for me, the memorization was a really challenging part of this when I first started. It was just trying to find the method that worked best for my brain because everyone learns differently, everyone absorbs information a little bit differently. But once I got that down, now the memorization comes fairly easily. But at the end of the day, on a day where we have 10 races and like big 10, 12 horse fields, my brain feels full.
I bet it does. I bet it does. Um, do you, during the course of announcing all these horses, do you end up with favorite horses?
Oh,
Some
absolutely.
do.
1000%. I'm deep down a horse person and a fan, first off. So
Yeah.
there have been a couple of horses at Parx so far that I have absolutely been smitten with. One, Wagon Boss, to me is like the ultimate war horse type. He's 10 years old. His best days were a little bit behind him, but he still had so much heart and so much enthusiasm for the job. He was one that every time I saw his name on the overnight, I was very excited because I knew he was going to try and I knew he'd show up and run his race. I actually wound up helping him get retired to a friend of mine's farm in Massachusetts where he's learning to be a fox hunter now.
Really? And
Mhm.
you're actually part of the retired thoroughbred farm, aren't you?
I worked for the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation for a couple of years, which was very rewarding. But I'm a board member of the Horse Fund, which is an aftercare organization, and I'm just very involved with Thoroughbred aftercare, kind of in every part of my life. I own two retired racehorses, and that's been very fulfilling for me.
Wow, that's so interesting. Uh, do you ride?
I do. I have the two retired racehorses. One of them was my show horse for a long time. He retired a couple of years ago. He's 20 now. And I just bought a third horse in last March, who is half thoroughbred. He's a half thoroughbred, half Clydesdale, and we horse show pretty competitively. or pretty seriously. We're not always competitive, but we try to go. We go. We're actually going to Ohio at the end of February to the World Equestrian Center to compete in a derby and some other fun things down there.
I'm actually in Ohio.
Oh, cool. I'll be in Wilmington
Oh, are you? We're in Cincinnati. So we're close to Keeneland and Churchill Downs.
and Turfway.
Yeah, and Turfway. Yeah, that's true. Well, you're so active. Do you have any other, you don't have time for any other hobbies, do you?
I go to a lot of concerts. That is my other kind of great love besides horses is the any kind of punk rock concert I can go to with one of my best friends. It's what we've done since high school together. So that's the only like non-horsey thing I really like to do.
Well, that's great. What you probably weren't a follower of Toby Keith. He just passed away.
Very sorry to hear he passed away. He was a big racing fan, which was nice, but not really my kind of music.
Yeah, I understand. Well, let me ask you something. You've got so much experience in so many different areas. Do you have any thoughts for younger people wanting to get into the horse business?
Absolutely. It's when you follow a passion and it's a part of who you are, then you're never going to feel like it's a job. There are days where it's work and there are days when it's hard. But for me, working in racing has never just been something I do. It's who I am. So I would recommend that any young person follow whatever lights their soul on fire, whether that's working in racing or whatever it is that they do.
Right. Well, that's very interesting. Well, listen, I sure appreciate you spending time with us. We covered a lot of areas. Is there anything you can think of that you'd like to say before we
Oh,
close?
no, I appreciate you taking the time and I appreciate all of the support that I've gotten from the fans across the country. It does mean quite a bit. So thank you.
Well, it's really an honor for us to interview you, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, you too. Thank you.